The morning mist slowly rose above the fields, revealing neat white fences and rows of trees along the driveway. Amelia Landgrave walked leisurely along the gravel path to the stable, braiding her unruly chestnut hair into a tight braid as she went. The day promised to be hot, and she wanted to get her main training done before the sun reached its zenith. The stable greeted her with the familiar smells of hay and leather, the quiet snorting of horses, and the steady tapping of hooves on the wooden floor. Passing by the stalls, Amelia greeted her charges. Each horse had its own personality and habits, and over the years she had come to know them thoroughly. "Good morning, beautiful." Amelia stopped at the stall of her favorite, a bay mare named Gracia. It was with this horse that her career began 18 years ago. Her father, the owner of a small auto parts factory, bought Gracia, then an unbroken foal, for his daughter's 15th birthday. He believed that a teenage girl needed a serious hobby to keep her out of trouble. The hobby grew into a profession. After school, Amelia enrolled in college to study horse breeding while continuing to compete. By the age of 22, she was already known in certain circles as a promising trainer specializing in preparing horses and riders for show jumping competitions. She met Tobias by chance. Her father asked her to accompany him to an industrial exhibition where he planned to look at new equipment for the factory. Amelia agreed more out of boredom. All training sessions had been canceled that day due to heavy rain. She was wandering between stands with some strange machines when her attention was drawn to a young man enthusiastically explaining how a complex mechanism worked. Tobias spoke about his work with the same enthusiasm she had when talking about horses. It was captivating. So was his sincere interest in her profession. He asked her all sorts of questions about equestrian sports, training, and competitions. They began seeing each other regularly. Tobias would come to the stables, watch the training sessions, and then they would take long walks around the neighborhood, talking about everything under the sun. He proposed 6 months after they met. They decided to have a modest wedding with only close friends and relatives. They spent their honeymoon traveling around the country by car, stopping in small towns and seeing the local sights. Then the search for a home began. Amelia dreamed of having her own stable, and Tobias supported the idea. They found a plot half an hour's drive from the city, an old farmhouse with a large area of land. The house needed renovation, but the location was ideal: hilly terrain, a river nearby, and spacious fields. The first year was spent getting settled in, renovating the house, building a stable, and fencing off the area for grazing and training. Gradually, things started to take off. Word of mouth worked flawlessly. Satisfied customers recommended Amelia to their friends. She took not only experienced riders but also beginners, including children. She especially enjoyed working with children. Their sincere delight in interacting with horses reminded her of her own feelings in her youth. Tobias often came to the stable in the evenings, bringing a thermos of hot tea or coffee. They sat on an old bench at the entrance, watching the sunset and making plans for the future. Everything seemed right and natural: her own home, a job she loved, a husband who understood and supported her. Amelia couldn't pinpoint exactly when it all started to change. Maybe it was when Tobias got a promotion and started staying late at work more often, or when she noticed that he was coming to the stables less and less in the evenings. The changes were so gradual that at first she didn't even notice them. Spring was rainy. Dampness permeated everything, turning the paths between the house and the stables into a muddy mess. Amelia habitually pulled on her rubber boots to get to her charges. Lately, Tobias had been grimacing more and more at the sight. "Maybe we should think about moving closer to town," he suggested at breakfast, without looking up from his tablet. "I saw some great townhouses in a new neighborhood. No dirt, paved paths, underground parking." Amelia raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What about the stable? All my students, the horses?" You could rent a spot at the city equestrian center. You could work there as a trainer without all the hassle of maintaining your own stable. Toby, you know this isn't just a job to me, Amelia put down her fork. It's a way of life. We discussed this when we bought the house. Tobias shrugged irritably. That was 5 years ago. People change, priorities change. I'm tired of driving an hour to work and back every day. I'm tired of our house smelling like a stable. I want to live a normal city life. Conversations like this became more and more frequent. Tobias stayed late at work, citing important projects. On weekends, he went away to conferences and seminars. Amelia didn't immediately notice how their life had changed. Dinners together became a rarity. Conversations became superficial, mostly about the weather and work. One evening, while hanging up the laundry, she found a restaurant receipt in his shirt pocket. It was from an expensive restaurant in the city center where they used to go on special occasions. The date on the receipt was Thursday, 7 o'clock in the evening. That day, Tobias had said he had an important meeting with clients. A worm of doubt began to gnaw at her soul. She began to notice details she hadn't noticed before. A new cologne, shirts she didn't remember buying, a strange aloofness in his gaze when she told him about her successes with her new student. Tobias's phone always lay face down. He used to leave it anywhere, but now he always carried it with him. One morning when he left for work and forgot his phone at home, the screen lit up several times with incoming messages. Amelia had never considered herself jealous, but her hand reached for the phone. The messages were from someone named Delilah H. Amelia froze, staring at the message previews. I miss you. Yesterday was wonderful. When can we see each other? She didn't know the password for the phone, but that was enough. It was as if someone had knocked the ground out from under her feet. That evening, she sat in the stable for a long time, mechanically combing Grace's mane. The horse sensed her mood, snorted softly, and buried its muzzle in her shoulder. Fragments of memories swirled in her head. How Tobias had started taking showers right after work more and more often. How the urgent calls had started, which he answered in another room. How his face changed when messages came in. Over the next few days, she watched her husband trying to find evidence to support her suspicions, or conversely, to convince herself that they were groundless. Tobias seemed oblivious to her scrutiny, lost in his own thoughts. He talked more and more about how his career had stagnated, how tired he was of the routine, how he wanted a change. On Friday, he announced that he was going to a 3-day seminar in a neighboring state. He packed a small bag, kissed her on the cheek, and left. That evening, Amelia happened to run into his colleague at the supermarket. "Oh, you probably don't know, but the seminar was canceled a week ago," he said in surprise when she asked him about his trip. She didn't sleep that night, tossing and turning in her empty bed. In the morning, exhausted from insomnia, she decided to check their shared computer. Tobias sometimes worked on it from home. In the downloads folder, she found photos from some trip to the countryside dated last month. In one of them, Tobias was hugging a young woman with bright red hair. They were smiling at the camera, holding glasses of wine. Amelia mechanically saved the photos to a flash drive. Her hands were shaking as she closed the laptop. One thought raced through her mind. How could she have been so blind? All the signs were there. The distance, the irritability, the constant delays at work. The classic signs of an unfaithful husband. Stepping out onto the porch, she stared for a long time at the morning fog rolling over the fields. Somewhere deep down, she hoped that there was some other explanation for all this, that she was wrong, that she was imagining things. But when she put all the pieces together, the picture was all too clear. In the stable, her usual work awaited her, feeding, cleaning, training. The routine helped her not to think about her husband's betrayal, about the red-haired woman in the photo, about the lies that had permeated their lives. But her thoughts stubbornly returned to what she had seen, to the strange messages on her phone, to the unexpected business trips and seminars. In the evening, after finishing work, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea. This used to be her and Tobias's time. They would discuss the day and make plans for the future. Now she sat alone, watching the sunset and trying to decide what to do next. On Sunday evening, when Tobias returned from the seminar, Amelia was waiting for him in the living room. A flash drive with photos was lying on the coffee table. Her husband looked tired and lost, as if he already knew what conversation was coming. "How was the seminar?" Amelia asked calmly, looking him in the eyes. Tobias froze in the doorway, his fingers tightening around the handle of his travel bag. "Fine. Listen, I'm tired from the road. Let's talk later, okay?" "That's strange. Your colleague Mike said the seminar was canceled a week ago," Amelia said, turning on her laptop. "And I found something else interesting. Would you like to see?" Opening a folder of photos, she turned the screen toward her husband. Tobias sank heavily into a chair and ran a hand over his face. "So, you know." "Know what?" "That you're seeing another woman? That you've been lying to me about business trips and seminars? That all your late nights at work are also lies?" "Her name is Delilah," Tobias said unexpectedly firmly. "We met 3 months ago at a company party. She's a sports commentator, covering a golf tournament sponsored by our company." Amelia felt nausea rising in her throat. It was one thing to suspect, but to hear the confession like that, straight to the point, without a hint of remorse or embarrassment, was another. "What now?" Her voice sounded hoarse. "I want a divorce." Tobias looked up at her. "Listen, we both know that our marriage has long since become a habit. You live for your stables. I live for my work. We hardly ever see each other. We don't talk. And instead of discussing this with me, you decided to take a mistress." "Delilah is not a mistress. I'm in love, Amelia. For the first time in a long time, I feel truly alive. She understands me, shares my interests. And I didn't understand you. 5 years ago, you were the one who supported the idea of buying this house and fixing up the stables." "5 years ago, I was a different person," Tobias interrupted her. "People change. I don't want to live in the middle of nowhere anymore, waking up at 5 in the morning to the sound of horses neighing, constantly smelling hay and manure. I want to live in the city, go to restaurants, theaters." "With Delilah," Amelia finished for him. "Yes, with Delilah," he nodded. "We need to sell the house and split the money. It'll be fair." Amelia felt everything inside her freeze. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "It means no. I don't agree to a divorce and I won't sell the house. This is where my work is, my clients. I've been building this business for 5 years. I've put all my energy and money into it. But it's our house. I also put money into buying and renovating it. And you suggested I buy it. Remember, you insisted on getting a bigger plot of land for the stable. And now, when everything is going well, when I have regular clients and a good reputation, you want to ruin everything?" Tobias jumped up from his chair. "You can't just refuse to divorce me." "I can," Amelia replied calmly. "And I am. This is my home and my business. I won't let you ruin everything." "You're being unreasonable," he said, pacing the room. "We can settle this civilly. We'll sell the house, split the money, and you can rent a place at the City Equestrian Center." "I already said no. You can go back to your Delilah and tell her how unreasonable I am. The house is mine." Tobias turned sharply toward her. "You'll regret this. I'll get my share anyway. Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you." He grabbed his bag. "Think carefully, Amelia. It'll be better for everyone." The front door slammed. Amelia heard the car start and the gravel crunch under the wheels. Only when the sound of the engine faded into the distance did she allow herself to cry. The next morning, the first thing she did was call her lawyer. After hearing her story, he advised her to think very carefully. The divorce proceedings could drag on if they couldn't agree on how to divide their property. But Amelia was adamant. This house, this stable, it was all she had. She wasn't going to give up her life's work just because her husband had fallen in love with a young red-haired commentator. The day after their conversation, Tobias came to collect his things. Amelia was training with her students when she heard the sound of a car pulling up. Through the panoramic windows of the riding hall, she could see her husband methodically loading boxes and suitcases into the trunk of his SUV. Noticing her gaze, he froze for a moment, but then continued as if nothing had happened. "Helen, watch your posture," Amelia returned to her work, forcing herself to focus on her student. "And don't forget the shank. Grace can sense your insecurity." An hour later, when she finished her lesson, Tobias's car was gone. Going up to her bedroom, Amelia found empty shelves in the closet and a note on the bedside table. "I'll pick up the rest on the weekend. I hope you'll reconsider selling the house." His things were gone from the bathroom, his laptop was missing from his study, and the shelf with his favorite books was empty. Amelia mechanically walked through the rooms, noting the changes. 5 years of living together fit into a few boxes and suitcases. In the days that followed, she threw herself into her work. She expanded her schedule, took on 2 new students, and began preparing Grace for the upcoming competition. Physical exhaustion helped her not to think, not to analyze, not to remember. But the city turned out to be unexpectedly small. Amelia learned details from mutual acquaintances that she would have preferred not to know. It turned out that the affair had not begun 3 months ago, as Tobias had claimed, but much earlier. Delilah Hodgkins had been a frequent guest at their office long before that ill-fated corporate party. "I'm sorry, dear, but everyone knew about it," Martha, Tobias's colleague's wife, told her over a cup of coffee. "They didn't really hide it. Lunches at the restaurant across the street from the office, trips to conferences together. I thought you knew." Amelia silently stirred her sugar, feeling her cheeks flush. So she was the only one who hadn't noticed the obvious? All these months she had been living in some parallel universe, blind to what was happening right under her nose. "And you know what's funny?" Martha leaned closer. "That Delilah, she's married too. At least she was. She got divorced 2 months ago. Rumor has it her husband caught her and Tobias in a rather compromising situation." Each new detail was like a punch in the gut. Amelia immersed herself even deeper in her work. She spent entire days in the stables, returning to her empty house only to sleep. She got into the habit of having lunch with her students. Fortunately, there were adults among them with whom she could talk about more than just horses. One morning she ran into Tobias at the supermarket. He looked older and somewhat rumpled, as if he hadn't slept well. Standing next to him was the red-haired woman from the photos. Delilah was taller than Amelia had imagined and considerably younger. "Hi," Tobias said awkwardly. "How are you?" "Fine," Amelia said, adjusting her shopping basket. "Busy." This is Delilah," he said, gesturing vaguely. "I guessed," Amelia replied dryly. "Sorry, I have to go. I have a workout in an hour." As she left, she heard Delilah say something to Tobias in a hushed voice. Her hands trembled as she placed her groceries on the checkout conveyor belt. That evening, Tobias's mother called. She started with small talk. How was she? How was her health? How was the stable? Then she got to the point. "Sweetheart, I know you're hurting, but maybe you should agree to the divorce? Toby says you have a buyer for the house." "So he's already found a buyer?" Amelia smiled bitterly. "No, Elizabeth. I'm not selling the house. It's my business, my life. If Tobias wants to start a new life, then so be it, but not at the expense of destroying mine." A new horse was waiting for her in the stable, a young stallion that had been brought in for training. Working with him required complete concentration. There was no time to be distracted by personal problems, and that was exactly what Amelia needed right now. She drew up a new training schedule, increased the number of group lessons, and started a course for beginner riders. She was getting more and more clients. There weren't many professional trainers in the area, and her reputation was working in her favor. In the evenings, sitting on the porch with her usual cup of tea, Amelia reflected on how strange life was. 5 years ago, she was sure she had met the man she would spend the rest of her life with. And now that man was living in a city apartment with a woman 5 years younger than her and making plans to sell their house. But the main thing was that she still had her work, her horses, her students, and no one could take that away from her. That evening, Amelia stayed in the stable longer than usual. One of the horses, a recently purchased mare named Zvezda, had a fever. The animal was restless, shifting from foot to foot and refusing to eat, so Amelia decided to stay with her until the vet arrived. The autumn nights were already getting chilly. She threw on an old jacket she kept in the utility room and sat down on a chair near the sick horse's stall. The other animals were dozing, only occasionally emitting quiet snorts and the tapping of hooves. Zvezda finally calmed down after the injection given by the vet, but Amelia decided to watch her for a while longer. She didn't notice how she had fallen asleep to the steady breathing of the horses. She was awakened by a strange smell, sharp, chemical, completely out of place in the familiar atmosphere of the stable. Going outside to check where the smell was coming from, she saw a glow above the roof of the house. Time seemed to stand still. For a few seconds, Amelia just stood there, unable to believe her eyes. Then her instincts kicked in, and she rushed to the phone to call the fire department. While waiting for them to arrive, she rushed between the house and the stable. Fortunately, the wind was blowing in the opposite direction, and the animals were safe. But the fire spread with incredible speed, as if something was feeding it from within. The fire trucks arrived 15 minutes later, but by then the flames had already engulfed the second floor. Amelia watched as the roof collapsed, the windows shattered from the heat and the walls turned black. Everything she had in the house, clothes, documents, photographs, mementos, was turning to ash. "Ma'am, you're lucky you weren't inside," said one of the firefighters when the fire was finally brought under control. Judging by the speed at which it spread, some kind of accelerant was used. This was clearly not an accidental fire. Amelia nodded, barely comprehending his words. She was still wearing the jacket from the utility room with her phone in her pocket, the only thing she had left. If it hadn't been for Zvezda's illness, if she had gone to bed as usual. By dawn, only a charred skeleton remained of the house. The firefighters had finished extinguishing the smoldering embers, and the police cordoned off the area with yellow tape. Amelia sat on a bench by the stable, wrapped in a blanket brought by a sympathetic neighbor, trying to comprehend what had happened. Her phone was ringing off the hook. News travels fast in a small town. Students, acquaintances, even Martha were calling. Everyone offered help, a place to stay, support. Amelia mechanically replied that she was fine, that she had a place to stay. In reality, she hadn't thought about it yet. The investigator, a young man with a tired face, asked her a few questions. Had there been any threats? Problems with anyone? Financial difficulties? Amelia shook her head. The only person she had a conflict with was Tobias, but she didn't want to believe that he was capable of such a thing. By noon, her mother arrived. Someone had called her. Seeing her daughter sitting in front of the burned-down house in an old jacket, she burst into tears. Amelia hugged her, feeling a strange numbness inside. All her emotions seemed to have burned away with the house. "Let's go home," her mother said, stroking her back as she had when she was a child. "Your father is getting your old room ready." "I can't," Amelia shook her head. "I have to look after the horses. Zvezda still has a fever, and anyway." "Sweetheart, you can't live in the stable. There's a lounge there, a sofa, a shower, all the amenities. I often stayed there overnight when there were problems with the horses." Her mother wanted to argue, but stopped herself when she looked at her daughter's face. Instead, she went into town to buy the bare necessities: clothes, toiletries, food. Amelia returned to her duties. The horses shouldn't suffer because of her problems. They needed to be fed, watered, and their stalls cleaned. The routine work helped her not to think about how her home had been reduced to charred ruins, not think about who could have done this, not think about how she had been left with nothing but the clothes on her back and an old jacket. Towards evening, Tobias called. His voice sounded strange, as if he didn't know what to say. "I heard about the fire. Are you okay?" "Yes," Amelia replied curtly. "I was in the stable when it started." "Thank God," he exhaled. "Listen, if you need help—" "No, I don't," she cut him off, unable to continue. At night, lying on the sofa in the recreation room, Amelia listened to the familiar sounds of the stable. Somewhere nearby, Gracia snorted, and Star shifted restlessly from foot to foot. Her fever had not yet completely broken. These sounds were comforting, reminding her that all was not lost. She still had her horses, her work. The rest was just stuff. It could be replaced. Investigator Raymond Pierce arrived the next morning. A tall man with graying hair and an attentive gaze, he methodically walked around the ruins, making notes in his notebook and stopping occasionally to take pictures with his phone. "Miss Landgrave," he said to Amelia, "or Mrs. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." "Mrs. for now." Amelia adjusted the collar of the new jacket her mother had bought her. "My husband and I are in the process of getting divorced." "I see." Pierce wrote something down. "Tell me more about the divorce. When did the process begin?" Amelia described the situation: Tobias's demand that she sell the house, her refusal, his departure to another woman. The investigator listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "So, the main conflict was over the house," he clarified. "And who is the house insurance registered to?" "Me." Amelia frowned. "I started taking it out before I got married, when I was just planning to open a riding school. Tobias was never particularly interested in these matters." Pierce nodded and returned to his inspection. He paid particular attention to the electrical panel, or what was left of it. He called in a specialist who spent a long time studying the wires and charred parts. "Look here," Pierce said, showing Amelia some metal fragments. "See these marks? Special equipment was used here to create a controlled short circuit, not the kind you can buy in a regular store. So this was definitely arson." Amelia felt a chill run through her. "Absolutely, and it was done by someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who is very knowledgeable about electrical systems and knows how to make it look like an accident." The investigator took out a new notebook. "Tell me about your husband. What does he do?" "He's a software engineer, working with numerically controlled machine tools. He develops programs for industrial equipment." "So he has a technical education?" Pierce raised an eyebrow. "And experience working with electrical equipment?" "Yes, but—" Amelia hesitated. "You don't think Tobias—" "I'm not thinking anything yet," the investigator interrupted her gently. "I'm just gathering information. By the way, where was your husband last night?" "I don't know. We haven't been in touch lately. He lives in the city with another woman." Pierce made a few more notes and returned to his examination. He was particularly interested in the marks on the ground near the house, some kind of footprints, flattened grass. The forensic expert carefully photographed every detail. "You know what's strange?" Pierce sat down next to Amelia on the bench. "Everything was done very professionally. The short circuit was designed to spread the fire as quickly as possible. A special compound was used. We found traces of it. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." "What does that mean?" "It means that either the arsonist is a professional or—" The investigator fell silent, staring at the charred walls. Or It's someone with technical training and access to special equipment, Pierce finished. I'll need to talk to your husband. Where can I find him? Amelia gave the address of the company where Tobias worked. The investigator wrote it down and stood up. One more question. Did you have any surveillance cameras? No, we lived quite far from the city. It's a quiet neighborhood. That's too bad. Pierce looked around. What about your neighbors? Only the Thompsons, but their house is too far away. The investigator nodded and headed for his car. At the door, he turned around. Mrs. Landgrave, try to remember anything unusual, strange noises, cars, strangers near your house in the last few days. Everything could be important. Amelia watched the car drive away. It was hard to believe that Tobias could have... No, she didn't want to think about it. But the investigator's words about technical training and special equipment kept running through her head. She spent the whole day doing her usual chores, training, taking care of the horses. The star was already on the mend. The fever had broken. Only when it got dark did Amelia allow herself to sit down on the porch of the stable with a cup of tea. From there, she could see the remains of the burned-down house, a black silhouette against the sunset sky. The phone rang. It was her mother again, worried. Amelia assured her that everything was fine, that she was quite comfortable in the recreation room. Then she sat for a long time, looking at the darkening sky and thinking about the investigator's words. Could the man she had lived with for 5 years really be capable of such a thing? Or did she not know the man she had married at all? The morning began with a phone call. Amelia was just finishing her morning chores when an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen of her phone. Mrs. Landgrave, this is Veronica Ashton from Continental Insurance. I've been assigned to your case. May I come by today? We need to discuss some details. Amelia made an appointment for noon, between training sessions. She didn't expect much from the insurance company. They usually find a lot of reasons to minimize payouts. The only thing she hoped for was to get at least some money to tide her over for the time being. Veronica Ashton turned out to be an elegant middle-aged woman with neatly styled gray hair and an attentive gaze. She arrived right on time, without showing the slightest dissatisfaction that the meeting was taking place in the stable's lounge. So, Mrs. Landgrave. Veronica opened a leather folder containing the documents. I've looked over your insurance policy. I must say, it was very prudent of you to take it out so early and to choose this type of coverage. To be honest, it was my father's idea, Amelia admitted. He insisted when I was just starting to plan the riding school. Your father is a wise man, Veronica smiled. This type of insurance is very rare these days. It covers the full cost of restoring your property in the event of any insured incident, including arson. Amelia looked at her incredulously. The full cost, you mean? It means that the company undertakes to restore your property in full, and at current market prices, not at the time the contract was signed. What's more, Veronica turned the page. Your insurance covers not only the residential building, but also all structures on the property, including the stable. But the stable wasn't damaged. That's wonderful. However, if necessary, for example, if you decide to build a new house elsewhere, the insurance will cover the construction of the entire new complex. Amelia felt her head spin. She remembered how her father had insisted on a certain type of insurance, how he had methodically paid the premiums all these years, but she had never thought it would be so important. What documents do you need? She asked, trying to collect her thoughts. They spent the next hour discussing the details. Veronica turned out to be a surprisingly pleasant person to talk to. No bureaucratic dryness or attempts to find loopholes in the contract. She patiently explained each point, wrote down Amelia's requests, and gave practical advice. Given the circumstances of the arson, she said at the end of the meeting, the company will provide you with security during the construction of the new house. This is standard procedure in such cases. When Veronica left, Amelia called her father. "Dad," her voice trembled treacherously. "Thank you. For the insurance. For insisting. I always said it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it." Her father's voice sounded cheerful. "How are you? Maybe you'll move in with us after all?" "No, I'll stay here. I have my work, my horses, and now I know I can rebuild everything." In the evening, Detective Pierce arrived to check some details in his notes. Upon hearing the news about the insurance, he tapped his pencil thoughtfully on his notebook. An interesting turn of events. So, not only did the arson fail to achieve its goal, but it also brought you an unexpected benefit. "It looks that way." Amelia poured him some tea, "although I would have preferred to do without the fire." Pierce took the cup, briefly touching her fingers. "By the way, I checked your husband's alibi. He was supposedly at home on the night of the fire, but the only person who can confirm this is his girlfriend. You don't believe him? Let's just say I have my doubts." Pierce took a sip of tea. "Not bad oolong. You know your tea?" "A little. It helps keep me warm during long workouts." They talked for about another hour, mostly about the details of the investigation, but sometimes digressing to other topics. There was something reassuring about his manner of speaking, the way he listened so attentively. When he left, Amelia caught herself thinking that, for the first time in days, she felt protected. The news of the insurance payout spread through the town with incredible speed. Amelia was looking through catalogs of construction companies when Tobias literally flew into the stable. His face was red with anger, his eyes feverishly shining. "So that's how it is?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "You've had insurance all this time?" Amelia calmly closed the catalog. "Yes, insurance. I took it out long before we met, and you never asked me about it. You set this up on purpose. You refused to sell the house because you knew." "Knew what?" Amelia rose from her chair, feeling a cold rage growing inside her. "That someone would set fire to the house? That I'd be left without a roof over my head? That I'd miraculously not burn alive just because I was delayed with a sick horse?" Tobias faltered, but quickly regained his composure. "That's not what I meant. You've got it all figured out. Insurance, no divorce." "Mr. Landgrave?" A calm voice came from the door. Veronica Ashton stood there, and behind her loomed two burly men in security uniforms. "Am I to understand that you are accusing your wife of deliberately causing an insurance claim?" Tobias turned pale. "Who are you?" "Veronica Ashton, Continental Insurance Company, and I strongly advise you to be careful what you say. Everything you say is being recorded," she said, pointing to a small voice recorder in her hand. Tobias turned and stormed out of the stable, nearly knocking over one of the security guards. Amelia heard the roar of his car engine. "Thank you," she said quietly to Veronica. "But you didn't come here for this, did you?" "Actually, I did," Veronica said, sitting down at the table. "We had reason to believe that your husband might react emotionally to the news about the insurance. By the way, I brought the preliminary calculations for the new complex." They spent the next hour discussing construction plans. Amelia had no idea how vast her possibilities were. Modern materials, the latest technology, a well-thought-out layout, all of this was now available to her. "You know," said Veronica, looking at the sketches, "I've been working in insurance for a long time, but I rarely see cases where misfortune turns out to be such a blessing. Your old house was nice, but the new complex will be much better." Amelia nodded, still unable to believe her luck. She could already picture the indoor riding arena for lessons in any weather, the spacious stalls with modern ventilation, the comfortable changing rooms for the students, the cozy staff house. "Just one request," Veronica became serious. "While construction is underway, don't stay here alone at night. I have a bad feeling about your husband. Security will be on duty around the clock, but still." "I'll be careful." Amelia promised. That night she lay awake for a long time, looking at the plans for the future complex. Everything was turning out strangely. Tobias's attempt to destroy her business was turning into an opportunity to create something much better. In the morning, Detective Pierce called. "I hear your husband caused a scene," he said, sounding concerned. "Are you all right?" "Everything's fine. The insurance company has sent security." "Nevertheless, be careful. Such emotional outbursts usually mean something. Do you think he might—" "I think a man who has failed in his plans is capable of desperate acts." Pierce paused. "I'll leave a patrol car nearby, just in case." Amelia thanked him, feeling warmed by his concern. She was already getting used to his calm confidence, to the way he was always there when she needed him. And then she returned to her plans. She had to choose a location for her new home, discuss the details with the architect, and think about the layout of the stables. The life that had seemed destroyed after the fire was suddenly filled with new meaning and new possibilities. Amelia was completely absorbed in the project for the new complex. She spent every free minute between training sessions working on drawings and plans, consulting with architects, and studying modern technologies for building equestrian facilities. To her surprise, many of her students showed genuine interest in the project. This was especially true of the older group, those who had been studying with her for several years. Jane, a 15-year-old rider, brought in a whole collection of photos of European riding schools that she had found on the internet. Others shared ideas for the layout of the changing rooms and recreation areas. "Look, Miss Landgrave," said Michael, the father of one of the students and a civil engineer by trade, laying out some diagrams on the table. "If we place the indoor arena at this angle, we can make the most of the natural light. And here we could put in panoramic windows with a view of the fields." Veronica Ashton came regularly to check on the progress, but their meetings had long since ceased to be purely business. They could spend hours discussing the details of the project, and Amelia appreciated her practical approach and sound advice. "You know what amazes me?" Veronica said one day over a cup of tea. "You're not just restoring what was lost. You're creating something completely new, something more perfect. It's a rare quality to be able to turn loss into opportunity." Construction began with clearing the site. Amelia insisted that the new complex be located slightly away from the burned-down house. She didn't want to build on the ashes. She chose a spot on a small hill with a beautiful view of the surrounding area. Her students continued their lessons despite the inconvenience caused by the construction. What's more, the number of people wanting to sign up for lessons only increased. News of the construction of a modern equestrian complex spread throughout the area. "My husband and I have wanted to put our daughter in equestrian sports for a long time," said one of the new clients. "But we waited until something really serious came along. What you are doing is exactly what our town needs." Even the neighbors, who were initially unhappy with the noise of construction, gradually became impressed by the scale of the changes. Mrs. Thompson, who had previously complained about the smell of the stables, now watched the construction with interest and treated the workers to homemade baked goods. Detective Pierce also dropped by, ostensibly on investigation business, but Amelia noticed how closely he examined the site, checked the fences, and talked to the security guards. His presence instilled confidence, although Tobias never showed up again after that incident. "You've chosen a beautiful spot," Pierce remarked one day, watching the sunset from the new hill. "You can see the whole property from here. And a wonderful view of the riding fields," Amelia added. "You know, sometimes I think that fire was a sign of destiny, a catalyst for change." "Perhaps," Pierce said thoughtfully, looking at her. "Although I prefer to believe in the power of character rather than fate. Not everyone is capable of surviving such a blow and finding the strength not only to recover, but to create something better." In the evenings, when the noise of construction died down and the students dispersed, Amelia liked to climb the hill and look at the future complex. The outlines of the main buildings were already visible, the riding arena was rising higher and higher, and the new stables promised to be more spacious and comfortable than the old ones. Grace, her old faithful mare, also seemed to approve of the changes. One morning, Amelia found her standing by the fence of the construction site, watching the machinery at work, snorting occasionally, as if expressing her opinion on what was happening. "Soon you'll have a new home," Amelia whispered, stroking her warm muzzle. "We'll all have a new home. And you know what? It'll be better than the old one." Tobias felt like he was going crazy. Every morning he drove to the next street and sat in his car for hours watching the construction site. He watched the walls of the new complex go up, the trucks carrying building materials come and go, the architects discussing something with Amelia, waving blueprints. It wasn't supposed to be like this. There was no place in his plan for this large-scale construction, this new modern complex, which already looked impressive. Amelia was supposed to be left with nothing, agree to sell the land, move away. Instead, she seemed to have gotten everything she ever wanted. Delilah didn't understand his obsession. "What does it matter?" she said. "You wanted to get rid of this place. Now you have. Let's go somewhere else and start over." But he couldn't. He couldn't accept that his plan had backfired. Every day he came to his usual place, gulped down his cold coffee, and watched. He memorized when the workers arrived and left, when the security guards changed shifts, who came to the training sessions. He was particularly annoyed by the presence of that investigator Pierce. He showed up too often for someone conducting a routine investigation. Tobias saw him and Amelia walking around the grounds discussing something, sometimes even laughing. Things were also going awry in the office. His superiors hinted at problems with his latest projects. His colleagues looked at him strangely and whispered behind his back. Even Delilah had become somewhat distant lately, staying late at work more often, citing urgent reports. But construction continued. Tobias saw special equipment being delivered for the stables, the latest ventilation systems, automatic waterers, energy-saving lighting. Everything Amelia had once dreamed of aloud, and he had dismissed as empty fantasies. One day he saw a distinguished woman in a business suit arrive at the construction site. She talked to Amelia for a long time, showing her some documents. Later, Tobias learned from mutual acquaintances that she was Veronica Ashton from the insurance company, who was personally overseeing the project. "They're going to install a fully automated climate control system," he overheard workers talking in a nearby cafe. "There's never been a stable like this in our state. In fact, in the whole region." Tobias gritted his teeth. He remembered how Amelia had shown him brochures for such systems 3 years ago. At the time, he had just laughed. Why go to such lengths for an ordinary stable? Every day of construction was a blow to his pride. The complex was getting bigger and more modern. A beautiful wrought iron arch with the school's name was installed at the entrance. They began laying special flooring for the outdoor arena. Tobias noticed how Amelia herself was changing. She seemed to blossom, became more confident, smiled more often. This infuriated him even more. She should have been suffering, regretting her stubbornness, but instead, he hardly slept at night, going over the options in his head. There had to be a way to fix everything, to get the situation back under control. He deliberately parked so that he could see the guards. He studied their routes, their shift times, their habits. Delilah noticed the change in his behavior. "You're obsessed," she said one evening. "It's not healthy. Maybe you should talk to someone." But how could she understand? How could anyone understand what it was like to see your plan for revenge turn into a triumph for the person you wanted to destroy? Tobias continued to watch. He knew that sooner or later he would find a way to fix everything. He had to. Otherwise, what had it all been for? Why had he taken the risk? planned it all out, carefully created a short circuit using his technical knowledge. A new plan was slowly forming in his mind. It was riskier, more desperate. But this time, he wouldn't make any mistakes. This time, everything would go according to plan. It was a moonless night. Security guard Mike Jenkins was finishing his rounds when he noticed a faint movement near the far fence. He didn't turn on his flashlight. Experience told him it was better to observe first. In the darkness, he could vaguely make out the figure of a person who was clearly trying to find a blind spot between the cameras. Mike silently activated his radio and called his partner. They had been waiting for something like this for several weeks. Both Veronica Ashton and Detective Pierce had warned that there might be another attempt. That was why they had insisted on increased security, even at night. Amelia was awake at the time. She had been suffering from insomnia for the past few days. She was sitting in the break room with a book when she heard muffled voices outside. Looking out the window, she saw security guards surrounding someone near the unfinished wing of the new building. Bright spotlights flashed. In the blinding beam, Amelia saw Tobias, disheveled, with some kind of bundle in his hands. He was struggling between the guards, trying to break free, but they were holding him tightly. "Call the police." Mike's voice sounded calm and confident. "And call Detective Pierce. Looks like we've got a repeat offense." The police officers who arrived found a canister of gasoline and some kind of electronic device in the bundle Tobias was carrying. An expert called to the scene determined that it was a homemade remote-controlled detonator. This time he decided not to risk it with the wiring, Pierce remarked grimly, examining the find. He wanted to put on a spectacular fireworks display. Amelia watched as Tobias was put into the police car. He didn't even glance in her direction, just muttered something under his breath. The security guards talked excitedly about how they had spotted him and organized his arrest. "We'd been watching him for several days," said Mike. "He was sitting in his car nearby, watching. Miss Ashton warned us to be especially vigilant." Veronica arrived half an hour after the call, surprisingly quickly for such a late hour. She looked composed and businesslike, despite the late hour. "Now we have all the evidence," she said, reviewing the surveillance footage, "and we can prove the first arson, the technical reports, his behavior, now this. The picture is coming together." Investigator Pierce lingered longer than the others. He spoke quietly with the security guards, checked the perimeter, and gave instructions to the patrol officers. Amelia noticed him touch her shoulder discreetly, a silent gesture of support. "Are you okay?" he asked when they were alone. "I don't know," Amelia replied honestly. "I was expecting something like this, but still, it's Tobias, the man I lived with for 5 years. How could he?" "Some people can't stand other people's success," Pierce said thoughtfully, watching the police cars drive away, "especially if that success came from their attempts to hurt you." By dawn, the commotion had died down. The security guards returned to their normal routine, only now there were more of them. Veronica ordered additional cameras and motion sensors to be installed. Amelia couldn't sleep for a long time. She sat in her room, looking at the complex under construction, illuminated by the first rays of the sun. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt a strange gratitude to the security guards, to Veronica, to Detective Pierce, to everyone who had helped prevent another tragedy. In the morning, she began her training as usual. The students already knew about the night's events. News travels fast in a small town, but no one asked any unnecessary questions. Only support could be felt in their glances, in their cautious touches, in their willingness to help with anything. Construction continued as usual. Life went on, and now that Tobias was in custody, Amelia felt for the first time in a long time that she could really relax and just live her life. The trial began a month after the second arson attempt. The district courtroom was almost full. The case had been widely reported in the local media. No wonder. A successful engineer had tried twice to burn down his wife's house because she refused to sell the property. Amelia sat in the front row between Veronica Ashton and Investigator Pierce. She was wearing a strict business suit for the first time. She usually preferred more comfortable clothes for working with horses. But today was a special occasion. Tobias looked haggard and lost. His lawyer, a young, ambitious attorney named Stevenson, had chosen an aggressive defense strategy from the outset. He tried to portray his client as a victim of circumstances, claiming that Amelia had deliberately provoked him by refusing to divide the property fairly. But the technical details of the first arson, which emerged during the investigation, destroyed this line of defense. A forensic expert described in detail how the short circuit had been set up. The defendant used his professional knowledge to create a controlled fire. The elderly expert methodically laid out photographs and diagrams. A complex delay system was used to ensure that the fire started at a specific time. Special materials were used to accelerate the spread of the fire. This was not a spontaneous act but a carefully planned crime. Testimony from Tobias's colleagues confirmed that shortly before the fire, he had been interested in the specifications of various electrical equipment, allegedly for a work project. He requested information about security systems and studied wiring diagrams. 2 weeks before the incident, the defendant took several samples of special materials from the laboratory, said the manager of the company where Tobias worked. He said it was for testing, but he never submitted a test report. The surveillance camera footage from the neighbors was especially interesting. It showed Tobias coming to the house several times late at night, supposedly to pick up some stuff. Now it was clear that he was setting things up for the arson. The prosecutor, a short woman with a sharp gaze, methodically pieced together a picture of a premeditated crime. She drew the jury's attention to every detail: the preliminary preparations, the use of professional knowledge, the careful timing. The defendant did not simply want to destroy property, she said. He wanted to make it look like an accident to avoid responsibility. Only a coincidence, the horse's illness, saved his wife from dying in the fire. Delilah also testified. She looked frightened and confused, nervously adjusting her red hair. She admitted that she knew about Tobias's plans to set fire to the house, but did not take his words seriously. He kept saying he would make her regret it, Delilah's voice trembled, that he'd find a way to get his share, but I thought it was just words. I didn't know. Investigator Pierce's testimony took almost the entire day. He described in detail how the investigation unfolded, what evidence was found at the scene of the first fire, and how surveillance was organized after the initial suspicions arose. The system used to cause the short circuit was custom-made, Pierce said, showing diagrams and photographs. Only someone with serious technical knowledge could have designed something like this. What's more, components were used that are only accessible to specialists in a specific field. When it came to the second arson attempt, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Security guards described in detail how they noticed suspicious activity and how they organized the arrest. Their testimony was corroborated by CCTV footage. Particularly impressive were the images of Tobias trying to enter the premises with a homemade explosive device. Explosives experts confirmed that the detonator was fully functional and could have led to catastrophic consequences. The defendant planned to set off an explosion followed by a fire, the expert explained. Given the amount of flammable materials at the construction site, the consequences could have been fatal not only for the complex under construction, but also for the surrounding areas. Veronica Ashton presented the court with a detailed report on the insurance claim and documents confirming the legitimacy of the insurance payment. Her testimony finally destroyed the defense's attempts to portray Amelia as a calculating manipulator. This type of insurance policy was taken out long before Mrs. Landgrave's marriage to the defendant, Veronica said clearly and confidently. Moreover, all payments were made from Mrs. Landgrave's personal account. The defendant never contributed to the insurance premiums. When it was Amelia's turn to testify, she felt the jury's eyes on her. Calmly and methodically, she recounted the story of their marriage, how Tobias had supported her dream of a riding school and then suddenly changed his attitude. "I couldn't believe he was capable of such a thing." Her voice remained steady, though she was trembling inside. "Even when the investigator showed me the evidence of the first arson, part of me still refused to believe it, and then he tried again." By the end of the trial, Tobias looked completely broken. When he was given the last word, he unexpectedly recanted his previous testimony and admitted his guilt. "I couldn't bear the thought that she had won," he said hollowly, "that all my plans had backfired. I wanted to make everything right, to make her feel as helpless as I felt." The jury retired to deliberate. Amelia sat in the courtroom hallway, feeling strangely empty. Pierce silently handed her a glass of water, and she nodded gratefully. His presence was calming. "It's almost over," he said quietly. "All we have to do now is wait for the verdict." Veronica sat down next to her and put her hand on Amelia's shoulder. "You did great. Now all you have to do is move on." Amelia nodded. Indeed, it was time to move on. The construction of the complex was nearing completion, and the students were eagerly awaiting the opening of the new riding arenas. Life went on, despite everything. After the court hearing, Delilah sat in her car in the court parking lot for a long time, trying to make sense of everything she had heard. The technical details of the first arson, the detonator for the second, the careful planning, none of it fit with the Tobias she knew, or thought she knew. Moments she had previously dismissed as insignificant came flooding back. His obsession with insurance, his constant talk about how Amelia had planned everything, his strange behavior in the weeks leading up to his arrest. Now it all fit together into a frightening picture. The next day, she arrived at the TV station where she worked as a sports commentator. News of the trial had already leaked to the press. Her colleagues looked at her strangely, whispering behind her back. The producer called her in for a talk. "Listen, Delilah," he began, tapping his pen nervously on the table. "You do realize that this story could damage the channel's reputation. Your name is now linked to a high-profile criminal case." She understood. What's more, she had already made up her mind. She asked for a week's leave to sort out her personal affairs. First, she went to the apartment where she and Tobias had lived for the last few months. His things were still scattered around the rooms. The police had only taken anything that might be relevant to the case. Delilah methodically packed them into boxes, trying not to think about how, not long ago, she had been making plans for the future with a man who had turned out to be capable of arson and attempted murder. In his desk drawer, she found a folder with some diagrams and calculations. She leafed through them and felt a chill. They were drafts of his plan. He had calculated everything, planned everything, using his professional skills, and he never once thought about the fact that there could be people in the house. The next day, a message arrived from the company where Tobias worked. He had been fired retroactively as soon as the first results of the investigation appeared. Now they demanded that his work laptop and all documentation be returned. "We cannot allow the company's name to be associated with this case," the HR manager said dryly when Delilah brought the items. "All of his projects will be reviewed by other specialists. The risk that he used his position to obtain materials and equipment is too great." Delilah visited Tobias only once in the prison where he was being held before sentencing. He looked haggard, with an unhealthy obsession burning in his eyes. "You understand that I did it for us, don't you?" he began, as soon as she sat down opposite him. "So we could start a new life, without this burden of the past." "For us?" Delilah felt nausea rising in her throat. "You tried to burn down a house where people could have been. You planned an explosion at a construction site. This has nothing to do with us, Tobias. This is all just your sick fantasy. But you said yourself that you wanted to leave, to start over. I wanted to start a new life, not destroy someone else's. Her voice trembled. Goodbye, Tobias. I'll pick up the rest of my things from the apartment and leave the keys with the concierge. After leaving the prison, she sat in her car for a long time, staring at the gray walls of the building. Inside, she felt empty. No anger, no resentment, only fatigue and disgust. Toward Tobias, toward herself, toward this whole story. That evening, she wrote a letter of resignation to the TV station. Her reputation was hopelessly ruined. Who would want a sports commentator involved in a criminal scandal? She gathered her things and booked a plane ticket. She needed to get out of this city and start over somewhere where no one knew her story. Before leaving, she wrote a letter to Amelia. Not an apology. What apology could there be? Just an admission of her part in the blame. For not noticing the obvious, for not stopping it in time, for allowing it all to happen. She didn't expect a reply. She handed the keys to the apartment to the concierge, got into a taxi, and drove to the airport, trying not to think about how easily the life she had considered almost perfect had been destroyed. In the end, she too was a victim of her own blindness and someone else's obsession. The day of the verdict was cloudy. Amelia arrived at the courthouse early, again wearing a strict suit, which now seemed like a kind of armor to her. Veronica and Detective Pierce were already waiting for her in the hallway. The courtroom was packed. The case had received widespread coverage in the local press. Journalists with cameras crowded around the entrance, hoping to get comments. Amelia walked past them silently, feeling the support of Pierce, who seemed to have accidentally stood between her and the most persistent reporters. When Tobias was brought in, she barely recognized him. He had lost weight during his time in prison, and his hair had turned gray. There was no trace of his usual self-confidence. He didn't even look up as he walked past her to the dock. The judge, an elderly woman with an attentive gaze, began by listing the charges. The first charge was arson of a residential building using professional skills and special equipment. The second charge was attempted arson of a building under construction using an explosive device. The court takes into account the defendant's sincere confession, the judge said in an even, impartial voice. However, it cannot ignore the seriousness of the crimes committed. Of particular significance is the fact that both acts were carefully planned and could have resulted in human casualties. Amelia listened as the witness statements, expert opinions, and technical details of the crimes were read out. She had already heard all of this during the trial, but now, when taken together, these facts made a particularly heavy impression. The court also takes into account the material and moral damage caused to the victim, the judge continued. The fact that the insurance company compensated for the material losses does not diminish the gravity of the crime. Moreover, the second arson attempt was committed precisely because of the defendant's dissatisfaction with this compensation. Pierce sat next to Amelia, and she felt his silent support. During the investigation and trial, she had grown accustomed to relying on his calm confidence. Veronica was also nearby, two pillars of support helping her stay strong. Taking into account all the circumstances of the case, the judge straightened in her chair. The court sentences Tobias Landgrave to 8 years imprisonment in a general regime colony. In addition, the defendant is ordered to reimburse the insurance company for the full amount of the payments made in the first episode. There was a murmur in the courtroom. Tobias's lawyer quickly jotted something down in his notebook, apparently preparing the ground for an appeal. Tobias himself did not react to the verdict, only lowering his head. "It's a fair decision," Veronica said quietly as they left the courtroom. "Considering all the circumstances, it could have been harsher." Pierce nodded. "The main thing is that now you can get on with your life without constantly looking over your shoulder." At the exit, they were again met by journalists. Amelia limited herself to a brief no comment and got into the car. Pierce got behind the wheel. They had agreed in advance that he would drive her home after the hearing. The drive to the stables was silent. Amelia looked out the window, thinking about how strange her life had turned out. 5 years of marriage, shared plans, dreams, and now it was all over, replaced by a prison sentence and shattered illusions. Her students had already gathered at the stables. No one had canceled practice, even on a day like this. It helped. The familiar routine, working with horses, the need to focus on something specific. "Thank you," she said to Pierce as she got out of the car, "for everything." He nodded understandingly. "See you at the opening of the new complex?" "Definitely," she smiled for the first time that day. Upon entering the stable, Amelia immediately felt the tension of the past few months melt away. This was her world, her work, her future, and now no one could take that away from her. Exactly 1 year later, Amelia stood at the panoramic window of her new office, looking out at the riding arena bathed in morning sunlight. The architects had exceeded all her expectations. The complex was exactly as she had imagined it: modern, comfortable, and thought out down to the smallest detail. The indoor arena with climate control allowed training to take place in any weather. Spacious stalls with automatic ventilation ensured maximum comfort for the horses. A cozy cafe for visitors, comfortable changing rooms, and a classroom for theory lessons. Everything worked as a single organism. Her pride and joy was the new stable. Wide aisles, bright rooms, special noise-absorbing flooring. The horses felt calm and confident here. Grace, her old faithful mare, now occupied a place of honor in the corner stall overlooking the fields. The number of students tripled that year. She had to hire 2 assistant trainers. She could no longer cope with the influx of people wanting to take lessons. She was particularly pleased that many of her first students had achieved significant success. 3 were preparing for important regional competitions. Miss Landgrave, Sarah, one of the assistants, peeked in the door. "The beginners group is ready, and the photographer from the magazine is here." Amelia nodded. An article about her school was to appear in the next issue of a popular equestrian magazine. The editorial staff was interested in the story of success built literally from the ashes. The day flew by in the usual hustle and bustle: training, classes, meetings with students' parents. In the evening, Veronica stopped by. They had become friends over the past year and often met just to chat over a cup of tea. "You look great," Veronica remarked, settling into a comfortable armchair. "That workout definitely did you good." Amelia smiled. "You know, sometimes I think maybe it's for the best. If it weren't for the fire, I would never have decided to make such changes." After Veronica left, Amelia decided to go for a ride. The evening was surprisingly warm for early fall. She mounted Grace and set off on her favorite route along the fields. The horses' hooves trotted softly along the dirt road. The last rays of the sun gilded the treetops and the air was filled with the scent of autumn herbs. Amelia often rode here. It helped her gather her thoughts. The road led her to a plot of land with a burned-down house. It stood untouched, its black walls and broken windows overgrown with weeds. A "for sale" sign hung on the gate. Amelia held her horse back, looking at the familiar outlines. Strangely, she no longer felt any pain when she looked at the ruins of her former life. Everything that had happened here now seemed distant, like an old dream. The new complex built on the hill was her real home. Grace shifted from foot to foot, snorting impatiently. Amelia stroked the horse's warm neck. "Yes, sweetie, you're right. It's time to move on." At that moment, the phone rang. It was Pierce. They had been seeing each other more often lately, and not just for business. "Did you forget about dinner?" His voice was smiling. "Of course not," Amelia smiled back. "I'll be there in an hour. just finishing my evening walk." She glanced back at the burned-down house one more time. Here, one story had ended and another had begun. A story about how sometimes you have to lose everything to gain something greater. Turning Grace around, Amelia headed for the new complex, towering majestically on the hill. Tomorrow would be a new day with new activities and new plans. Life went on, and it was beautiful in its unpredictability. The horse walked steadily along the road, carrying her further and further away from the past. Ahead lay the future, bright, full of new opportunities and hopes, and she was ready for it.